Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app.
This episode is proudly sponsored by Integrity, your partner for life. Integrity recently launched an exclusive research paper to help advisors understand how to attract and retain new clients. They believe their role in the industry is bigger than just providing products. They want to help create a sustainable industry, educate clients, and support advisors personally in their business. You can get a copy of the report and learn more about Integrity if you visit integritylife.com.au/XY.
Welcome back to the XY Advisor Podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and today I'm joined by XY legend Nathan Fradley. G'day, Nathan.
How are we going?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. All hyped up on caffeine, which is nice.
Yes, we're recording this early in the morning, so we're all hyped up. Excellent. Now, give the listeners a quick overview of you and your business at the moment.
Yeah, sure. For those that don't know me, Nathan Fradley, I run Lime Financial Planning. We're based in Melbourne, out in the burbs, although I have a second location in the People's Republic of Northcote now, which is where I live, which is great. And yeah, I mainly focus on retirement planning, aged care, but with a huge push into ethical investments. If any of you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll know that I nag everyone every day about climate change.
Yes,
yeah, so
that's certainly authentically you. That's absolutely you. So tell us about your journey. How did you get into financial advice?
So I actually, when I was at uni, I had two subject conveners, one in the financial planning space and one in the, I suppose, investment space. And they were sort of working with both of them at different things. And the investment convener actually lined me up an honours placement. So it was a paid placement, doing honours, go down the academia route. I think the subject was Fibonacci sequence on the Singapore Stock Exchange or something from memory. Yeah.
Of course.
And yeah, no worries. And that was it was really intriguing. I was really into, I suppose, the academia of finance and the hard numbers and Black Scholes and all that sort of fun stuff. And the other one said to me, "What are you doing? You're a people person. Go speak with people. You will lose track of who people are, what they do. The zeros on the screen will stop meaning they'll mean nothing to you anymore." So before I finished uni, I ended up getting a job in a call center, booking financial planning appointments, which is a complete digression from the prestige of academia, and did that for a couple of months and then applied on a whim for a job at NAB and was brought on as the wild card, I suppose you'd call it, placement in that program. And that was a 12-week program where it was deep dive training into all aspects of financial planning, and then sort of set out on the world to sell MLC products, as was the style at the time. But it was actually an amazing, the training itself was all about people. It was never about product. The product was, that was the only product you could use, but it didn't matter because we were focusing on people. And I think that sort of set me on I had a lot of really good mentors early on in the piece. In the insurance side of things, if anyone knows Luke Ashby, he probably listens, so shout out to him. And Chris Joyner, I think he's over at Industry Funds now. But they were two huge mentors of mine very, very early on in the piece that I suppose set me on that journey. And so did that. So we did this mobile role for 18 months and went out into, placed across branches. And then I got offered a spot out in Q as a senior planner after about 2.5, 3 years. So I went out there, and at that point I knew I couldn't stay at the bank. It was the environment that I felt very shoehorned, I suppose you'd call it. You could only deal with MLC products. It was only certain things. And I had to get out. I had to do it right. So I spent sort of the next 18 months upskilling myself and working a lot on self-managed super fund, a little bit of aged care and that sort of stuff. And then exited and sub-licensed under another planner. And then this was back when the CFP and what's the AFA one?
FCHFP. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got that and I forget what it is. When they were kind of the standard of education, and the guy who ran that practice decided he didn't want to sort of do that anymore. So 3 months after being self-licensed under him, he exited the industry. And so I bought that practice with my business partner now, who was a mortgage broker that did a lot of work with him. So we took that over and spent the next, it's been 6 years now, rebuilding it from the ground up from what was a very transactional based business into a very holistic and people purpose orientated approach.
Wow, fantastic. And that's one heck of a journey. I love the way that you called yourself a senior financial planner 2.5 years in, and now sometime after that. Are you still senior? Do you still call yourself senior, or are you now back to junior? Where did the journey take you?
I'm not sure. At 32, I don't know. Am I senior now?
Oh, you're so
I was
senior.
25 when I was a senior planner at NAB.
Yeah.
So, I think it was 21 when I got authorized. So yeah, I don't know. I think that was just the way you'd give people, or the banks might give people confidence in your standing within your license within their brand, I suppose. Yeah.
We're not here to knock an institution. That's all good. So you're and a lot of the work you do now, you mentioned holistic, you mentioned ethical, the side of things. You love to help people. You love to get really deep and analytical into what their needs are, their preferences are, all those types of things, which we'll probably go to a bit more into the end of this podcast. But one of the things I wanted to bring up really quite early in the podcast and talk a lot about was some of the work you're doing with the XY community. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what I'm talking about?
Apart from being a serial pest and commenter on the platform, I think the XY ethics committee is probably what you're referring to there, and is a little brainchild of mine, and then sort of fleshed out and grown with Andrew Lane, Michael Miller, and the wonderful M. That came about. Last year, my wife, who's a lawyer, a case she was working on went to the Law Institute of Victoria's Ethics Committee. And they thought they were fine in terms of what they were doing. It's a land law case. It was nothing nefarious. But they'd previously worked on a case close by, and it was a similar nature. So the precedent being relied on was something that they'd previously been involved in. And so they were pulled up to the ethics committee, and the committee determined that they couldn't take that case. Now, they were pretty adamant that they could. And then when they found that out, they were like, oh, okay, cool. And they moved on. So they informed the client, and that was it.
So I'll go back a step. Your wife had a case and they were looking at taking it on. And then so they went, we'll just check this. So they voluntarily submitted the case to the ethics committee.
Yep. Someone said to them, are you sure you should do this? And they were like, we'll take it ourselves and find out.
Yep.
And that when it wasn't looking at take it on, they were halfway through it. They'd done work, and then at that point realized, taken it to the ethics committee. The ethics committee determined they shouldn't take on that case, and they were like, okay, and moved on and informed the client, did the whole thing, passed it on to another professional who ran that file, and that was it. And I was just blown away by, I suppose, the professionalism and standing and respect, one, to the committee itself, but also of the professionals to say, okay, if a group of my peers have just determined that this is not appropriate, then that's what I'll do. And so I had a quick chat to my licensee about the idea, and I think they had sort of too much on their plate. And then I spoke to Em about it, and I said, look, I think this is something that we could do from the bottom up. I think no licensee involvement, no association involvement, and a pure grassroots, which is her favorite word, grassroots approach to this committee. But I don't think now's the time to work on it. I've got too much else on myself. Let's park it to the side, or as affectionately known throughout people who know me as a tennis ball, if I am the proverbial Labrador with all the tennis balls in my mouth. So we put that tennis ball on the shelf, and then she gave me a call earlier this year, and she'd been chatting to Andrew Lane, and the subject had come up. And she said, do you want to get this going? And I was like, absolutely. At this point in time, my ethics committee was Michael Miller. If I ever had a question around what I needed to do, I went to him, or a few other advisors I know in the community. So I gave him a call and said, hey, do you want to take part in this as well? And we started that conversation. So through the beauty of video meetings, we had a couple of meetings and sort of just fleshed out what it was we wanted it to look like. How is it going to be approached? How do we get it started? I think there's a lot of questions we still want to answer around procedure and policy and formality, but we wanted to just get it out there in the community and that minimal viable product, as it were, so that we could just get a feel for what kind of help people wanted and really just, start something.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because there's obviously a precedent, the law societies of the different states, and it could just as well easily be a national committee if the law societies ever decided to do that. But look, it's a precedent. It's there. It's being used by another profession, and as we develop, and we are, we say we're a profession, and we are, but why not learn from other professions? So you've taken that model, I guess, if you like, and said, well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We'll just do what they do. Is that what you're doing?
Basically, yeah. It was completely inspired by Law Institute of Victoria. Yep. That's to the point where when we were forming what we wanted it to look like, we pulled up their structure and said, how do they approach this? Where do they see their authority? Where do they see their authority end? What do they do and what do they not do? And then how can we apply that into our own industry, looking at our code of ethics, and fitting in with the world that we have around us, because we are much more regulated than the law, I suppose, profession. They are a lot more self-regulated. In fact, their entire law societies and what have you are all sort of self-created. So how do we fit that in within FASEA, within and the code, within our individual licensees and licensee policy, within the Corporations Act and all the other bits of legislation we can apply to, and where is the space that we can really add value? And then in the same token, using what we already had within the XY infrastructure as well, and saying, well, this is something where we'd want to access the best people we can in the country. We don't want to all be in the same room at the same time with a minute of meeting and someone jotting things down and and they're meeting once a week or anything like that. We're all busy people. A lot of them are self-employed or trying to build their careers. So how do we do that in a way that is facilitative to that using modern technology? And it was simple. We already had it. It was right there. So M set up a private group where the determinations are posted into, and like anywhere else in XY, all of the members will comment and contribute to that conversation. We have timestamps, we have who said what. It's all very, very formal from that perspective, but it means that if someone likes to do things first thing in the morning, they can jump on and comment first thing in the morning. If someone's in and out during the day, they can comment during the day. If someone likes to do it before bed and really get themselves fired up, by all means, they can do that. And that allows us to make sure everyone gets a chance to contribute, as well as not limiting people on their capacity to be a part of the group because of, what else they're doing outside of the community.
Yep. So there's a lot of different aspects to this, and we'll probably uncover a few. Interested in the way you said some people want to, check out an ethical determination just before they go to bed. Certainly help them sleep at night. So let's go through let's start with the advisors. If somebody wants to, how would somebody use it? What's the purpose of somebody using it from an advice point of view? I've got a case, I've got an idea. How am I going to go about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say something comes, or a file comes across their desk. So the sample file, or the sample example we used for our application was actually taken part in from something that was commented on XY, which had previously, while we were developing the committee, 3 separate comments came up on XY that would have been perfect cases for the committee. So something comes up and says, I've got a client, we're working on they've just inherited some money, and we're working on their file, and it looks like they've had $100,000 that was never declared to Centrelink beforehand, and with this new inheritance, they're going to lose their pension. How do I handle this? And that was the example that we'd provided. So if that sort of situation, they've met that client, they've started going through everything, they're going through the fact find, and all of a sudden they get that feeling in the back of their throat that says, something's not right here, I have to make a decision. Usually what they would do is probably think about it, maybe speak to their spouse, ring one of their colleagues, maybe post it on XY, which we've seen before, and sort of just go off that, ring their licensee potentially. What we would encourage is that they jump straight on the designated page on the XY website and basically fill that information in, tell us the background, tell us the time frame at which you'd need a response by. Ideally, we want at least 7 days to give everyone a chance to contribute. If you need a response back that day and we need to pull everyone in quickly, we can do that. Although we've discussed the idea of immediate responses requiring some form of donation to a charity of some description. It's a bit of payment for everyone's time, but we haven't determined what to do there yet. So you jump on there, you put your determination or your questions in there. you talk about why it's a dilemma. So this is a situation and here's why I'm stuck. Here's where I haven't been able to come to that conclusion, and what I'm considering as my options at this point. That's all we need to know. I mean, as much detail it helps, but concise, accurate information is also useful. No personal information, no confidential information. We don't need to know anything about the client's name and date of birth, or maybe date of birth might be relevant, but age is probably more. That comes through to us, and then we can discuss what it is about that is the situation. So we'll directly comment on, for example, the code. So in the case of the determination for the application process, that was pretty clear cut. Standard 1, don't circumvent the law. You know, help your client facilitate their disclosure of that information to Centrelink. That's fine. But what we also want to be able to do outside of that is then talk to not just the direct standard and say yes, right or wrong, but also how do you handle that from a client perspective? How do you engage the client to explain that process, to talk them through how best to not spook them? You walk in there and go, well, you've been fraudulent, we've got to report you. That's not going to help anyone. You're still working with your client, that you've still got their best interest at heart. So how do you manage that? And then what else is to consider? The problem here is the symptom is they've got to disclose something to Centrelink, and they're going to have to repay some age pension. But the actual underlying issue is once they inherit this money and repay that money, then what? They no longer have the security of that age pension income that they're so used to. They've lost their concession card. So all their costs have gone up in their day-to-day life. And now they're completely self-funded. So how do we then meet that? And so we're not going to sit there and go, oh, you should invest the money like this and da-da-da. But we'll raise those questions around, find out information about this, this, and this. What's their health like? Is there any aged care concerns? Have they got any broader or other circumstances that you need to consider? How they're meeting their income needs? All those sorts of things. And then sort of providing that back. And we're hoping that through that process, as a community, we're going to get better and better at identifying those broader things, identifying the broader needs, having better conversations with clients, and building libraries really of determinations that are become best practice that can be used. And I know the Law Institute of Victoria's determinations have actually been used in court and have been relied on. And it's been determined that because a group of peers with the right information have said this is the right way, that you've done your effort. You've gone and found out how best to handle this. You've not just ignored it. You've not acted in your own best interest. You've actually gone and said, how should I do this? And gone through that process. And that for itself speaks volumes. So that's how we would encourage. If you get a dilemma, if you're not sure, big or small, related to a client file, related to something at work, we have had a dilemma come through, which we've just gone back for some more information on, by a paraplanner who's really concerned about the standard of work they've been given, that they keep getting clients coming in who have got really no interest, or at least no notable interest in their investments. They're in an industry fund and they're being put in more expensive wrap products consistently. It's the same portfolio every time. And so they're like, what do I do here? I'm not the advisor, so it's not my job, but I don't think this is necessarily right. So there's all sorts of circumstances where we can tap into each other as an industry, and to go back to that as a grassroots approach, really raise that standard.
Yeah, there are so many different parts to this. Now, I wanted to, my next question was going to be about those determinations and publishing of those determinations. I guess that I'm assuming there's going to be some sort of outcome, and then that might be broadcast within the community. Also, as you said, a library for people to be able to search for determinations.
Absolutely. So when we first do it, we'll send it back to the advisor who submitted it to us, assuming that they've not done it anonymously, which is an option. So they'll see it before everyone else will. Then we will post it up in the actual ethics committee group, which everyone can subscribe to. And then within that group, there's a library. So we have a separate area of determinations, which will, as we build that library, we'll start collating into the different areas of advice. So there's both a determination library as a resource, there's the group, and then we'll also share those posts to the main page as well. So they'll be fairly prominent. And I think as they start coming in, more and more people will start identifying situations where they themselves might have a case to submit, and that'll start building that momentum.
Yeah, very interesting. So look, one of the areas I wanted to dive into is the conversation around, obviously dilemmas are created when there's some sort of conflict, and it doesn't have to be just conflict of, self-involvement. It could be a conflict between what they're doing with regards to their PI insurers or their licensee standards or compliance with what they feel is the right thing to do, as in the right thing to do, I guess. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Huria, in our first meeting the other day, actually said you can do something that is ethical but not compliant, and you can do something that is compliant but not ethical. And I think that really nailed the scope of what we're trying to do here. We're commenting on the ethical situation, but from a broader advice perspective. So we're not involving ourselves in licensee matters. If a licensee is determined that they're going to hold a certain standard or a certain approach, and we don't think that's right, so be it. But we do believe that the code of ethics sits above that. And in fact, I'm pretty sure in one of the explanatory statement lines, it says, if an investment that is in the best interest of your client is not on your APL, you should seek approval to use it because it's in the best interest of your client. So that fairly substantially says, hey, licensee standards aren't the be all and end all. The code is, your client is really. So I think in that instance, we're going to focus on that ethical side of things. The compliance side is a completely different matter. Although there is some crossover, absolutely. I think it's an entire minefield, and probably another podcast that we could discuss different cases for about 3.5 hours, Joe Rogan style, if we really wanted to dive into it.
Yeah, certainly there's going to be a lot of that dilemma is still going to be there, I guess, even after the determinations, aren't they? They're going to be, well, ethically, this is what I say I've got to do. And as the advice provider, I'm obviously, required to do this, this, and this. But then I've got other compliance issues that I've got to deal with, which is separate, which I might have to have some serious conversations with my licensing about.
And maybe you can take that determination back to your licensee and say, look, I know you guys exist within your constraints, but I've actually sought advice from the broader community, and here is some other opinions from other advisors and non-advisors, other professionals, other experts, to assist in that. And potentially we could see, the raising the standard at the licensee level as well, as we become more interconnected and less siloed between licensees, which we do know is definitely a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There are different rules and regulations out there depending on who you're with. There's no doubt about that. And so as we go through this, I want to talk about some of the concepts that will come up, I think, a lot in the difference between. I think a lot of financial services products are pooled based product. So they're based on numbers and stats over large groups, a lot of funds, etc. Like large funds are doing these things. Insurance is obviously a pooled product. What's in the best interest of all of the members of that pool may not necessarily be what's in the best interest of one individual in the pool. And so when we talk about representing your client and the ethical dilemma for the client, it could actually be different for the group than the client.
Absolutely. I think super funds are struggling with that concept entirely at the moment. A number of them will say, we're doing this, this, and this for climate change. But one of our key standards is choice. We're stewards of your money. We're out there doing this and this. We have the option for you to invest in a more sustainable or ethical manner, but you have choice because we can't meet those standards for everyone. I think that's a real challenge for advisors as well. I think one of the, a couple of the key aspects of the code, determining what's in the best interest of your client from a strategic and from a product perspective, standard 2 and 5 are really key, because just simply asking, for example, on that ethical advice front, do you have any ethical preferences, is the equivalent of being at a bar or at a restaurant and someone coming and saying, oh, would you like a drink? It's like, yeah, I'd love one, but what do you have? I don't know. Do you sell beer here? What kind of beer do you have? Have I ever had beer before? I don't know what exists. Maybe you've got some exotic cocktail that I'm really going to like. That's the same kind of thing. I think as advisors, we need to have far, far more robust conversations around ethical preferences and also product preferences as well. I was in a session with Em back at the start of May, where we talked a bit about platforms, Em and Rob, and what's the difference between, say, a platform industry fund and when is that appropriate and not. I think these are all these areas of preferences. Obviously, I've got a substantial interest in the ethical advice, sustainable investment, responsible investment area of that. But I think that's a real challenge, and probably I've got a solution for that as well. So I'm probably overtly biased on that basis as well.
Well, I do want to know. I'm going to ask you about that solution in a minute, but before we get there, I want to tackle into this this conversation around groups versus individuals a little bit more, if I can. When it comes to, say, insurance products are obviously based on, or insurance books, if you like, or companies are very, very based on the concept of pooling everyone together and healthy lives and non-healthy lives. From an individual basis, the advisors definitely focused on the individual client and helping those individual clients, and probably ethically they've got their entire client base to consider as well as clients when they're looking at this. But how do obviously advisors have been doing a great job and helping their individual clients and reviewing them regularly. But that obviously from an ethical point of view and from the product manufacturer's point of view also creates some problems for insurance books, because it kind of it brings that individualization back, which goes against the concept of pooling, which is detrimental to the concept of pooling and the concept of insurance itself.
I think that's a really interesting and timely topic with the nature of the APRA review at the moment. I think if you look at what's happening to insurance products and the dilution of definitions and the conversations that I'm sure everyone's been having over the last few weeks, with BT's increase, with AIA's increase, with TAL's increase, with OnePath's increase, with the unannounced increases that are probably to come from the other insurers, I think that it's such a hard topic, because for that individual who you have a best interest for, whose insurance premiums have just gone up 72.5%, for an agreed value age 65 policy, potentially for an amount or a benefit that they themselves wouldn't be able to claim for anymore because their income may have come down, you want them to have the best possible cover. You want them to know that if they actually, you probably set it up for that matter, if they actually couldn't work due to illness or injury, they could get the maximum amount. But at the same time, the fact that they're in that situation and they're getting paid a higher amount that they potentially have been earning under their pre-disability capacity, that means the premiums are going up unsustainably. To use BT in his example, in the 3 years prior to their most recent increase, they had 10% increases. That's a doubling in premiums. So it's all well and good to have better definitions, and it's all well and good to have age 65 policies and all sorts of things. But at the same time, you're getting 100% increase in premiums over 3 years because it's unsustainable. That in itself is not going to help anyone, because you're having insurers lose a lot of money. If insurers lose a lot of money, they're not going to pay out as many claims. There's that whole individual versus group aspect that's really conflicted in that capacity.
I think it's conflicted because if you end up with one person in the group getting a much better, let's say, deal out of it, then it means that other people in the group are getting the worst deal, right? You can't the money's got to come from somewhere. It comes from the other people in the group. So by looking after clients very well and giving them a great deal, if you like, out of the group, then other people in the group end up losing. So it's a very interesting. I think it's a dilemma for all this review that's happening. Not just for the advisor's decision, because the advisors have to do what they have to do, but it's an interesting dilemma from the government point of view. Generally, when they make legislation, they go, there'll be some winners, some losers, but overall, there'll be more wins than lose. Whereas to me, this seems like the way it's been set up, there's going to be more losing than winning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what I'm most concerned about in that capacity is to talk about the group again, is that there's going to be a lot of clients who can't go elsewhere. Yes. They can't go to more sustainable insurance products. They're unable to. They've had their policy for a long time. They may be on set premiums, and they're copying these increases, and then they have no capacity to change insurer. So all of a sudden, all the healthy people leave the pool and move to these new, cheaper products. The premiums skyrocket, and either they become uninsured, or they pay the premium. And it happens a lot with certain insurers that use siloing of books. But, as an industry-wide phenomenon, I think that's going to result in a huge amount of underinsurance.
Yes.
Combine that with the loss of distribution that we have seen over the last couple of years, falling away. The average value of insurance premium has gone up, but that just means that people at the lower level are just not getting cover. Yeah, that's going to create a massive, massive issue. And I think that in itself undermines the entire capacity. And again, another conflict of the single versus the group.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's some big ethical dilemmas in there when it comes to that. But obviously, your group, and we'll introduce the group in a second, is all around the individual determinations for financial advisors.
Absolutely. Although interestingly, I have had a conversation. I won't give too much away because they're still deciding whether or not they ask. But this was a private email where someone had a claim, and their question was around whether or not that claim, they knew that person outside of their professional capacity, and it was an income protection claim. They've been on it for some time. So whether or not that claim was actually worth, with what responsibility they had to report that person's lifestyle outside of that claim versus what they've been reporting to the insurer. So, I think that in itself falls into this entire pool of the situation, because that's the individual again against the pool. You want to take care of the individual, but is the pool detrimental, and is that detrimental to all my other clients?
Yeah, that's an interesting one again, but you're absolutely right. That's an ethical dilemma. And I guess some of the precedents, and you mentioned back the Law Society, there has to be a lot of determinations already that you guys can work off from the Law Society, because I guarantee somebody may have, I don't know, say committed a crime and then told the lawyer they'd committed a crime but asked them to defend them, which would be a similar ethical dilemma.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it necessarily, I think there's, and I'm not the lawyer, and I probably have to ask my wife on this one, but I'm fairly sure there's pretty substantive rules around that. If someone admits that, they've effectively, I think that there's the aspect of justice that comes into the lawyer's world, where everyone deserves justice, whether they're guilty or not. But I'm sure there's a lawyer in here going, "That's the simplest thing ever, Nathan." Yeah. But I'm not a lawyer.
Oh, well, they'll be all over you on LinkedIn as soon as they hear this. Very good. Now, tell us about the committee. How did people apply to it, and who's on the committee?
Yeah. So with the committee, we had basically that application form that how would you handle this case from a client, advice, and ethics perspective were the questions we asked. We had equal number of male and female applicants, which we were absolutely blown away by, given that 20% of the industry, or at least the licensed industry, is female. To have that was fantastic. The caliber was amazing, and the variation in responses. We had a number of people who really got stuck on which standard of ethic it was, which standard it fell to. But the answers that really stood out saw more than just, yes, you have to report this to Centrelink, like obviously. But here are the other concerns, the other standards that come up. One person raised the competence standard. If you're not sure what to do here, are you the right person to work with this client? Or should you be either working with another advisor to help you ensure competence or referring out? Some referred to the broader circumstances around, the income requirements in retirement, the aged care stuff, all that. So that's really where we want to get to from a standard advice perspective. And the people that did that really stood out. And then the why do you think you'd be a good fit to committee was the other question there. So we wanted to see, we wanted a variety of mindsets. We didn't want the same person repeatedly. In fact, one person that applied, I thought gave an amazing answer, but they gave my answer, which was rightly pointed out. We already have a Nathan, so we don't need another Nathan, which was really disappointing for me and them, I'm sure. But that's 100% right. We didn't want the same people saying the same things. We actually wanted that diverse range. So we also asked questions around whether or not they've done the exam and the ethics unit. It wasn't a bare minimum, but we wanted to make sure that at least using that as a base understanding of the code. We had a number of people who weren't advisors apply from different sectors. So Huria is one. So many people will know her through her exam prep and her knowledge of the code. So she applied at the last minute, which we were very glad about because we were hoping she would. And her application was excellent, and she's on there. She's not an advisor, but she's got a great understanding. There's obviously myself, Andrew Lane, from an insurance perspective. He's got a huge background as that of a long career in insurance. Michael Miller wrote the book on ethical matters when it comes to, literally wrote a book. It's coming out very soon. There's your plug, Michael, that when it eventually gets published. So he's done a lot of work with AFCA determinations. So he sort of has a good background in that section, also very technical on aged care and Centrelink. We've got Morgan from Queensland, just a brilliant application, really well considered, and also a broad background in what she has done previously, which brings a lot more variety, I suppose, to the table. Alistair Sutherland, he's actually an accountant. who is going to be licensed as an advisor. In fact, probably at the time of publishing this podcast, he will have his license. Great SMSF knowledge, very technical, and I think a great addition. We've got Erica Cummins from Regional Vic. So we also tried to look at regional and metro cases as well to try and get a bit of a different perspective from that angle. Em's decided not to take part in the committee. She's going to facilitate, but she's not going to include herself in any determinations. And we've got Hoy, who runs a self-license, has a broad background in compliance as well, and it is actually in chats with ASIC as well. I saw her at a round table recently, which is always entertaining to wave at someone across a Zoom meeting when talking about cost of advice. So she's sort of doing a lot of great work outside of that. So hugely diverse team, great backgrounds, and great mix of individuals, and very hard decision, actually. We had some outstanding applications. Some very prominent people in the advice industry applied as well. So we were actually really glad that a number of these people aren't that prominent, and hopefully that'll give them a real chance to show the advice profession as a whole who they are, but what they can do. And we think they're all pretty great. So very much looking forward to working with them.
Yeah, fantastic. And how is that committee going to grow or shrink over time? I guess if you've got lots of determinations, you might need more people eventually.
Yeah, that was actually a really tricky part, is determining how many people we should have. There's the old too many cooks sort of mantra. We were looking at between 8 and 10, and we decided to settle on 8 because it's easier to add than to kick people out. So initially, we'll see how that runs. I'll probably write most of the determinations in the first part. And then as that starts flowing and everyone gets a feel for the group and how we do things, then everyone will take it in turns. And if we find that we're getting a lot of questions coming in, if we find that there's gaps in our knowledge base that we need to fill, we'll then reach out to the past applicants who have expressed interest in joining if the opportunity comes available, or potentially, advertise again and open it up again as it's more established, more people know about it, and maybe more people want to take part knowing what it's all about. Or able to take part where they couldn't previously. I know I spoke to a number of people who wanted to apply that had either too much on their plate or had promised themselves no extracurricular activities, and they wanted to focus on their business at that point in time, which is perfectly understandable. So, yeah, I think we're just going to wait and see how it evolves and where it can go from here. We think it's going to be pretty great, but it might not. It might take a form that we didn't even know could have existed when we started.
Yep, fantastic. Well, congratulations. And if any advisors want to throw some ethical dilemmas at you, check out the XY Ethics Committee on the app, or if you want to reach out to yourself or Em, or send you an email or whatever it might be. What's the best way for somebody to say get hold of you if they're thinking of us putting something in?
LinkedIn is easy. Email is fine as well. It's nathan@limefinancial.com.au, or find me on the XY platform and send me a message that way. But LinkedIn's probably the easiest way for anyone to contact me if they need to.
Fantastic. Now, we talked about the concept earlier of preferences and asking, a client some deeper questions around, their exact preferences when it comes to, the ESG conversation, which is obviously a very nice way of saying, ethical investment funds, but it's also a very big umbrella, a large group of things, and really, sort of like, as you mentioned before, it's like it's a drink, not exactly what type of drink. Do you want to go into a bit more depth about how and what people can be thinking about with that?
It's a challenge I've had over the years in the ethical space. I think my first ethical, responsible investment clients said, I would like this. And we sort of grew from that basis. I think when you're starting to have conversations with people that don't know that's an option, it becomes very tricky. So I think RIA, the Responsible Investment Association of Australia, have a great fact-finding tool and a lot of good resources on there. So that's more of a checkbox exercise. Is there anything you would like to avoid, invest more in, or you're neutral on? But it can feel very unnatural to sit there and just fill out a checkbox. I often have a conversation around the concept of the beneficiary of an investment. So when you're investing traditionally in advice, you're investing for a goal, with a particular growth or income orientation and a time frame. And that will deem the characteristics of the investment, for the beneficiary being you as an individual. What we're able to do now that we've never been able to do before, purely on a product availability basis for retail investors, is invest for the benefit of others as well, with seemingly no loss to your own benefit. So you can invest for the same return, but also creating a social quantifiable social benefit or social return as well, whether that be through impact, exclusionary, all that kind of thing. So I think that conversation is a good way to introduce it to a client. Say, this is how we're going to invest for your goal of retirement. But did you know you can also achieve that goal and have a greater social benefit? Is that something you want to explore? I know at the start of the year, I worked with some 75-year-old clients from Stoke-on-Trent. Stoke-on-Trent's in the Midlands of the UK. I think it's the headbutt capital of the world. I can say that because my family's from Stoke. And they're super, super lovely. Been in the country for 40-something years, still have thick Stoke accents. Not necessarily the kind of people that on face value you would categorize as ethical investors. And having that conversation, it turned out they actually had very strong values around helping everyone. And to quote the client, he said, we've just got to take care of each other better. And if we can do that in a variety of ways, we'd love to. And so they ended up with a dark green portfolio, I would call it. And they were very, very happy with that and loved the intricacies of it and how it came out. So I think, what you'll very quickly discover is if returns are taken off the table, which most research is showing that ethical investing returns the same or better than non, then returns are taken off the table, people will absolutely want to do this kind of thing. The challenge is, where do you go next? Especially as an advisor, I've had a number of conversations with other advisors who are single ARs in a practice that just don't have the time to spend researching and diving into this stuff. So there's resources in Market Forces, their website for researching super funds, and their ASX 300 allocation, or how aligned to the Paris Accord it is. Responsible Returns is run by RIA, and that has a lot of funds that have paid to be analysed and accredited. And then there's also My New Baby. Also Leaf Ratings by the Ethical Advisor Co-op is another great resource as well. And then there's mine and my wife's new business, which is called Ethos. And we're really just trying to solve that problem of, firstly, how do you have that conversation with your client in the first place? And then how do you quantify that? And then using that data, how do you then provide a solution that's a portfolio that meets that need?
Oh yeah, I'm going to go into that in a minute. I really like the conversation that you get into around values, preferences, values, ethics, those sorts of things. And I love talking about the fact that I think that the value of advice is determined by the client, and you don't really know if your advice is providing true value until you understand what your client's values are. And I really like this as a lead. That's a lead way into the conversation around. So we need to find out what you value in the way of different types of companies in the world, how they act and how they behave ethically, and then you can then determine what their what the outcome will be of that. So I like this way that this starts with the client's values and then works through to, okay, well that's great. Now that we know these things about you, we can then come up with utilizing strategies and therefore product at the end of it off the back of their values, and therefore the advice is going to be valued by them a lot more. It's way less around returns.
I think if you even go a few steps back, to include this in any normal conversation, when you're having a client conversation, you're talking about what's important to them. Great conversation focuses on purpose, and you're using purpose to build goals, but goals are just a framework around how to achieve that purpose of who they want to be and what they want to do. And so things like the value of their children or grandchildren and who they are to them or their family as a whole, what they do in society, what they do for work, what their exercise and diet regimes like, all these little things can give you broader indicators into who they are, but also who they're not being. I think that comes out quite commonly as well when you're talking to someone about what's important to them, but where they're stuck. If they're in a job that they're stressed, but they're doing it because they need to earn some extra money, because they want to achieve that goal, but really they're unhappy. How, as an advisor, can we give them the power to eventually leave that job that they're unhappy to pursue something that makes them happy, but with a sense of financial security? A lot of the conversation I talk about with all clients, but it's a sort of a retiree conversation. I stole from a mental health model that I saw at a presentation once. And so it focuses on, it's a bit of adapted, but my version focuses on 6 areas of fulfillment. So the first one that we would talk in financial planning is financial security. Now that can either be achieved from work at current, but also as you approach retirement, from the knowledge that you've got enough money to continue living the life you want to live. But then there's the other things that we often get from work or from our broader life. So things like meaningful social interaction, which is not socialization necessarily, because everyone's different. My meaningful social interaction is being surrounded by a lot of people and having lots of conversation. My wife's meaningful social interaction is, herself and 3 others, and a couple of bottles of wine. So everyone has a different desire from that perspective. I think another important area is personal development or self-actualization. So the pursuing value of what's important to you in constant development. I think, for some people, having hobbies and doing those sorts of things is really important, but a lot of people get that accidentally. They go to work and they put out fires and they come home and they go, oh, that thing happened to me today, blah, blah. But they overcame it. So that gives them a sense of, self-esteem. They might spend time with their kids and help their kids with their homework, and their kids overcome something that they're challenged with, and that will give them a sense of self-esteem. When we're retired or in general in life, we need to fulfill that. And often we find when people stop work, they lose that, automatic version of that they've been having for 40 years. Work has supplied them with socialization and purpose for 40 years, and all of a sudden they've lost it. So I think diving into what can deliver those sorts of things outside of work is really important. The other areas are routine. I think everyone found in COVID, when you lose your routine, all of a sudden the rest of your life starts to fall away as well. Work and a reason to get out of bed and get out of the house for a certain time, and get the train you need to get, etc., gives you that routine, and that can help structure the rest of your day. Health and fitness, again, during COVID, I think that was exposed massively. Losing the regularity of that routine and going to the gym and, not being able to socialize, go for long, so, a lot of people started doing more healthy and fitness orientated things and walking and things like that. But also some people started eating more Uber Eats. So I think health and fitness becomes an important part. Acknowledgement and appreciation, I think, is sort of a more wishy-washy version, but often at the end of a big long week, you sit down, you go, how good was that? Work Christmas parties, you sit down and go, look what we achieved this year. Those sorts of things often fall away when work stops and retirement. These are all things that create value for people that I think we often take for granted on a day-to-day basis. They're the kind of stuff I like to dive into before I start talking about whether or not they want to divest fossil fuels. I think it's important to determine who they are as a person and what's important to them and what they're doing now that's misaligned with that. And as advisors, we can facilitate that transition. Yeah,
there's definitely a lot of different parts of the conversation you can go into with the client. It can be hours and hours of conversation before they become a client. Talk to me about some of the stuff, the work you've been doing on helping or determining and sitting with the client to actually work out and choose a portfolio, because I think advisors will be wanting to know exactly how you're doing it.
I think initially it starts off with a conversation of what we've already discussed about a greater beneficiary, and then it sort of feeds into. The first one I always just bring up is climate change and fossil fuels. I haven't had a single client say no to divesting fossil fuels. One, because they actually don't want to be part of the problem, and 2, because they're stranded assets and they're bad investments. And I've got all the charts in the world to pull that to show that. So I think between those two things, no one wants to be left holding the bag. But that's more of a stick than a carrot. I think a lot of people just really, I haven't had a single no to divesting fossil fuels. So that's always an in straight away. And it's a given. And it's sort of a pledge that I'd taken myself at the start of the year, that every client would divest fossil fuels over the next 1 to 2 years, as far as I can start progressing them, depending on capital gains tax and other best interest aspects. But I think that's really, really important. And then we start looking at, areas of social benefit and of environmental benefit. So life on Earth and life above and below water, using the terms from the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as areas of First Nations, Aboriginal rights, and refugee stuff, and I suppose areas around poverty and social inequality and that sort of thing. I think they start to sort of come out naturally as part of that conversation. I don't think it's necessarily very structured initially. I think it's very, I suppose it flows, because you need to really see, they'll bring up what's really important. And then to follow that, I used to use that checklist that I spoke about, the real one, or more recently we've been using our app to sort of determine that, and that guides that conversation in that capacity.
Fantastic. And so that means you're working on an app?
Yes. So Ethos is the app. And the idea of it is that it takes them through a series of questions. So there's the different areas that they can click that are important to them, whether that be gender equality, climate change, life above water, life below water, that sort of thing. And then from there, they rank the things that are important to them. So they select what is important, often it's everything. And then they rank the things that are important. And then from there, each of those things dives into the detail areas.
Yeah. Okay. So that prioritization takes place, and then you can. So tell us about this app, mate. Is this just for you, or can we all use it?
It's absolutely available for everyone to use. It's a soft launch in Australia at the moment. So a select few advisors are test running it for me. We're adding more and more funds to it because once you've gone through that assessment process, it gives, I suppose, a persona to your client as to what kind of ethical values they have. And then what we use at the back end is through a number of data subscriptions and machine learning and data scraping, we're able to analyze individual companies and their scores. And then those companies form parts of the portfolios which managed funds and ETFs would have. And then you can then match the client's needs to their portfolio. And through that portfolio, you can say, okay, well, your current portfolio looks like this. It has a gap around climate change. It has a gap around reducing inequalities. It has a gap around poverty. And so what we're going to do is research some funds using the tool by ranking funds by those areas and find investments that we can then use to match up against your individual values. You could have a couple with the exact same portfolio, but completely different answers. And each fund would then be scored differently depending on their values. And so it produces a comparative and quantifiable, I suppose, answer to can you meet everyone's individual investment objectives, which you absolutely, we think we've built a tool that you absolutely can.
I was trying to answer the question of how do you quantify a client's ethical investment values and then provide investment advice that both meets those values but has the evidence to back it up. There's so many products out there. It was really hard to ascertain what was good and what wasn't. And I found a guy in the States who's been building the exact answer to my question. So for the last few months, my wife and I have been working with him to launch that product in Australia.
Wow. Sounds fantastic. Now, if somebody wants to get hold of that, I guess LinkedIn is probably the best way to get hold of you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn. I would reach out on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you'll see some posts of mine on there anyway related to that, and we'll be able to kickstart that.
And you're sort of softly launching that throughout the year, I guess.
Softly launching at the moment, aiming to have a full launch at the start of the new financial year. So we're just using a group of advisors at the moment to, I suppose, iron out some of the creases and add in as many funds as we can so that when we do have a hard launch, it's as functional as possible.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, Nathan, thanks very much for coming and chatting to us today. There's so much stuff you're working on. It's unbelievable. The XY Ethics Committee is obviously a big part of that. And again, another shout out to all the committee members for being involved, donating their time, volunteering, helping the positive evolution of financial advice by, just helping their fellow, advisors make ethical decisions and determination. So that's fantastic. Appreciate you coming on. Also, sharing your investment app that you've created, which I think sounds amazing. I'd love to see more of it. So, look, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, Fraser.
Well, there you have it. Another episode of the XY Advisor podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and I'm joined by Emily Blanche. Hey, Em.
Hey, Fraser. How's things?
Oh, tremendous. Thank you. Yeah, very, very good. And how are you?
Amazing, as always.
Let's do a shout out.
Yes, let's. Today, I want to give a shout out to Steve Salvia, absolute legend who jumped on for an XY Plus web event recently and crushed it. So the topic, which I think is very prevalent for many advisors, was around finding freedom in your business. So putting some practical strategies in place to remove the tasks and the jobs within your business that are uninspiring. They are not the jobs you should be doing. It's the boring stuff. File notes, compliance, everything that revolves around the big ticket items and the stuff that is what advisors get excited about getting out of bed in the morning, right? The client-facing stuff, the communications piece, the strategy and building those out. So it was a super valuable, highly interactive session. And the beautiful thing is that it now lives as evergreen content in the XY Plus library. So if you are an XY Plus member, do yourself a favor, jump in and watch the replay. And if you're not an XY Plus member, you can head to the sign up page, xyadvisor.com/plus, jump in, join the inner circle and access the entire content library.